My wife cheated on me with my family's accountant after my parents died, and they stole $500K. But the accountant's wife showed up at my door with evidence. And now they're both in prison while I rebuild my life with his daughter. I'm 34 years old. I work in the family commercial real estate business. Well, I worked. Now I basically run it by myself. And I need to tell this story because what happened like a year and a half ago literally destroyed my marriage, my trust in people, and almost left me financially ruined. The thing is, I always knew that having money could be complicated. My parents warned me 1,000 times about people who only want to get close because of what you have. But I never thought that the person sleeping next to me every night for 7 years could be one of those people. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I met Brittany in college, I was like 20 years old. I was in my 3rd year studying business administration at a pretty expensive private university. My parents insisted I go there. And I met her in a marketing class. Brittany was different from the other girls who normally approached me, those who immediately started asking questions about my family or what. My parents did. She was smart, super focused on her studies, worked part-time at a coffee shop to pay part of her tuition because she had scholarships, but it wasn't enough for everything. I liked that about her, that she was independent and hardworking. We started dating, and I remember one of the first times I invited her to dinner at a nice place. She insisted on paying her part, and when I told her, "Don't worry, I'll treat you," she looked at me seriously and said she didn't want me to think she was with me for my money. At that moment, I thought it was super noble, right? Looking back, I should have realized it was a perfectly calculated act. We dated for like 3 years before getting married. During that time, she met my parents several times. She was always super respectful and kind to them, never asked them for anything, never made comments about their money or their lifestyle. My parents loved her, or at least it seemed that way. My mom told me once that Brittany reminded her of herself when she was young, before meeting my dad, hardworking and with clear goals. We got married when I was 24 and she was 23. It was a nice wedding, but not excessively luxurious. She herself said she preferred something intimate with close family and some friends. After the wedding, we moved into a house that my parents helped us buy. Well, they basically bought it, but it's in my name. And that's where what I thought would be our happy life together began. What I didn't know is that when we got married, my parents did something that they thought was generous and I thought was a gesture of love towards Brittany. They added her as a beneficiary to the family trust fund. That trust fund, it's complicated to explain, but basically my grandparents created it decades ago and my parents managed it. And when I turned 25, I started receiving annual distributions. Not an absurd amount, but enough to live comfortably without working if I wanted to. But I always worked. My parents taught me that money doesn't mean you shouldn't be productive. So I joined the family real estate business, and honestly, I liked it. Brittany also worked. She got a position at a financial consulting firm, and she was doing well, making her own money and seemed happy. The first years of marriage were good. Not perfect, because no marriage is, but we were happy, I guess. Brittany was affectionate. We got along well. We had plans to have children eventually, but first we wanted to focus on our careers. She traveled a lot for work, sometimes entire weeks. And I also had my trips to see properties and close deals. I trusted her completely. It never crossed my mind that she could be doing something behind my back. Edward, the accountant who had been managing the trust fund since my parents hired him like 10 years earlier, came to the house from time to review papers with me. Brittany met him several times. She was always kind to him, but nothing that made me suspect absolutely anything. Then the worst thing that has ever happened to me in my life happened. Well, before all this disaster. My mom died of a heart attack when I was 30 years old. It was super sudden. She was healthy as far as we knew, and one day she just collapsed. My dad was devastated. They had been married for like 35 years. Brittany was super supportive during that time. She was with me at the funeral, helped organize things, consoled my dad, everything a good wife is supposed to do. 6 months later, my dad also died. The doctor said it was a stroke, but I know it was a broken heart. He literally couldn't live without my mom. I lost both my parents in less than a year and was completely alone in the world, no siblings or close family, just Brittany. During that horrible year, Edward handled all the trust fund paperwork, the wills, the estate taxes, all that complicated legal shit that I didn't understand well, and honestly, I didn't have the headspace to understand. He told me everything was in order, to trust him, that he had been doing this for my family for years. Brittany also told me not to worry, that Edward knew what he was doing, that she could review some documents if I wanted because she understood finances. I trusted both of them, completely, because I was dealing with grief and trying to keep the family business running without my parents. It was like a year after my dad's death when everything went to hell. It was a Friday night. I remember the date perfectly because it was our 7th wedding anniversary. I had made reservations at the restaurant where we had our first date. I had flowers. I had bought a gift. I was trying to do something special because the last few months had been difficult with grief and work. Brittany got home late, like 2 hours late, and when she walked in, she didn't have the face of someone about to celebrate an anniversary. She sat down in the living room, looked at me, and said, "We need to talk." Those 3 words never mean anything good, right? She told me she had been thinking a lot about our marriage, that she felt we had grown in different directions, that she wasn't happy anymore. Basically, the whole classic speech of someone who's going to ask for a divorce. I stood there with the flowers in my hand, feeling like an idiot, trying to process what she was saying, asking her if there was anything we could do. Couples, therapy, whatever. She shook her head and then dropped the bomb. She said she had met someone else, that they had been seeing each other for a while, and that she was going to leave with him. I asked her who, like expecting her to tell me some coworker or, I don't know, someone from her social circle. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Edward." Edward. My family's accountant. The guy who had been managing my parents' money, my money, for years. The guy who was in my house consoling me after my parents died. That Edward. I couldn't breathe properly. I literally felt like someone had kicked me in the chest. I asked her how long they had been together, and she said like 2 years. 2 years. That meant it started right after my mom died, while I was devastated and vulnerable. I yelled at her. I'm not going to lie. I yelled horrible things at her. I asked her how she could do that to me, especially at that time in my life. She just grabbed a suitcase that apparently she already had packed. Mean, she planned all this, and left. Just like that, after 7 years of marriage, she left with my family's accountant like it was nothing. The next few days were hell. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat well. I called a lawyer to start divorce proceedings because obviously I wasn't going to forgive that. I tried to contact Edward to ask him what the fuck had happened, but he didn't answer my calls or messages. Then, like a week after Brittany left, the doorbell rang at my house around 9 at night. I opened the door, and there was a woman I didn't know. Elegant, well-dressed, with a face that had been crying but also with an expression of determination that was a little scary. She said, "Hello, Tyler. I'm Karen, Edward's wife, and I need to talk to you urgently." I let her in because honestly I was so confused I didn't know what else to do. Karen came in, sat down in my living room, and started telling me things that made my situation go from horrible to absolutely catastrophic. She told me that Edward had confessed the affair with Brittany after she found messages on his phone that he asked her for a divorce, and that when she started investigating their finances to prepare for the divorce, because Karen is a lawyer, important fact, she discovered something much worse than infidelity. Edward and Brittany had been stealing money from the trust fund. She showed me documents, bank transfers, emails she had gotten from Edward's computer. All the evidence that for the last 2 years, since my parents died, and Edward had total access to the trust fund without supervision, he had been diverting funds to offshore accounts, and Brittany had been helping him using her financial knowledge. I can't explain to you what I felt at that moment. I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my parents and having my wife leave me for someone else. But it turns out they had also been systematically stealing from me for years. Karen told me that according to her preliminary calculations, they had stolen like $500,000, maybe more, that she needed complete access to all the trust fund records to know for sure. She was furious, not only because her husband had been unfaithful, but because he had committed fraud, a federal crime, and had put her and her daughter at risk. They had a little girl, like 3 or 4 years old. Madison, I had never seen her before that. Karen proposed that we work together that we combine resources and evidence to destroy Brittany and Edward, legally and financially. She had the legal skills, and I had access to the trust fund and the records. I agreed without thinking. Honestly, at that moment, the only thing I wanted was for both of them to pay for what they had done. We spent the next few weeks gathering evidence. Karen got a private investigator. We reviewed every transaction in the trust fund since my parents' death. We found secret bank accounts, properties that Edward had bought in the name of shell companies, a whole elaborate scheme they had built. Brittany tried to contact me like 3 weeks after she left. She sent me messages saying we needed to talk about the divorce, that she wanted things to be amicable, that there was no need to involve aggressive lawyers. I didn't answer her. I passed everything to my lawyer. Then she showed up at my house one day. She apparently still had keys. Walked in and found me in the kitchen. She tried to hug me, crying, saying she had made a mistake, that Edward wasn't who she thought he was, that she still loved me and wanted to try again. I pushed her away and told her I knew everything, that I knew about the money, that Karen and I had all the evidence. Her face changed completely, from regretful to scared to angry in seconds. She yelled at me that I couldn't prove anything, that Edward had handled everything and she had nothing to do with it. Pure lies. I told her to leave and that I would see her in court. Karen, let me tell you, is brilliant and also absolutely ruthless when she needs to be, devised a plan to get more evidence. She asked a friend of hers to contact Brittany, posing as a recruiter for a consulting firm, offered her a job interview, and during that interview, which was actually Karen recording from another room, the friend asked her specific questions about her skills in financial management and investment structuring. Brittany, wanting to impress to get the job, because apparently things with Edward weren't going so well financially. Ironic considering they stole $500,000. Started talking in detail about how she had helped a client optimize certain transactions and structure offshore accounts. She basically confessed her participation in the fraud without realizing it because she thought she was in a legitimate job interview. Karen sent the recording to the company where Brittany worked, along with evidence of the fraud. They fired her immediately, like that same day, because having an employee involved in financial fraud is a huge risk for any company. Brittany called me crying, screaming that I had ruined her life, that Karen was an evil bitch. How could we do that to her? I told her that she ruined her own life when she decided to steal from me and cheat on me, and I hung up on her. Things escalated quickly after that. We filed civil lawsuits against both of them for fraud, embezzlement, everything the lawyers told us we could file. We also reported everything to federal authorities. Because defrauding a trust fund crosses state lines and is a federal crime. Edward was arrested at his office. It was super public. It was on the local news and everything because it was a big financial fraud case. Brittany used all her savings to pay Edward's bail because apparently he had no liquidity. All the money they stole was in accounts that were now frozen or in properties they couldn't sell quickly. Karen was handling her own divorce in parallel and fighting for full custody of Madison. Edward tried to fight for shared custody, but after he was arrested, that basically went down the drain. One night, like 2 months after all this, Edward showed up drunk at Karen's house around 11 at night, banging on the door and yelling that he wanted to see his daughter. Karen called the police, but before they arrived, Edward broke a back window and tried to get in. Madison woke up with the screaming and the sound of breaking glass, started crying hysterically. It was horrible. The police arrived and took him away again, violation of restraining order, trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, more charges to his growing list. Karen called me that night completely broken. Madison wouldn't stop crying and was terrified. She didn't want her mom to let her go. I went to her house to help. I stayed there that night sleeping on the couch in case Edward tried to come back. Madison was a super sweet girl. It broke my heart to see her that scared. And the following days, I stayed several nights at Karen's house, helping with Madison. While Karen worked on all the legal cases, the divorce, the lawsuits, everything, Madison started to feel comfortable with me. We played. I read her stories before bed, like I became a stable presence for her in the middle of all that chaos. The first court hearing was like 4 months after all this started. It was mainly for the civil lawsuits. The criminal ones were going separately in federal court. Brittany and Edward arrived together with their lawyer, who was obviously cheap because they didn't have money for a good one. We had a legal team that Karen had put together, she herself handling parts of the case because she's a litigation specialist. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, recordings, testimonies from forensic financial experts, everything. The judge didn't even try to hide his disgust when reviewing the documents, like you could see on his face that he thought Brittany and Edward were scum. Edward tried to argue that he had only borrowed the money and that he planned to return it, that it was an error in judgment during a difficult time. Brittany tried to say that she didn't know what Edward was doing, that she only gave him some general financial advice without knowing it was stolen money. Nobody believed them. The judge ruled in our favor on everything, ordered them to return all the stolen money plus interest and punitive damages, basically an amount we knew they could never pay. Their properties were seized, their accounts frozen, everything. Criminally, Edward pleaded guilty, hoping for a reduced sentence. They gave him like 5 years in federal prison. Brittany also eventually pleaded guilty when her lawyer told her that if she went to trial, the evidence was so strong she could get more time. They gave her 3 years. My divorce from Brittany was the easiest thing in the world after all that. Annulment of the marriage, technically for fraud. She received nothing, obviously. Karen divorced Edward just as quickly and got full custody of Madison with a permanent restraining order. Now, like a year and a half after all this started, things are finally settling down. I recovered most of the stolen money after selling the properties Edward had bought with those funds. Not all of it, but enough. The family business is still going. I run it by myself now that my parents are gone, and honestly, it keeps me busy, which is good, because otherwise, I'd just be thinking about all this shit. Karen and I have become super close, not in a romantic way, not yet at least. Who knows what will happen in the future? But she became my best friend through all of this. Madison sees me almost as a father figure. I take care of her often when Karen works late. I take her to her ballet classes. I do everything a father would do. Brittany wrote to me from prison like 2 months ago. A long letter asking for forgiveness, saying she was sorry, wishing she could turn back time. I read it once and threw it in the trash. Edward never tried to contact me. I guess he doesn't have the face to. Sometimes I think about how I could have been so blind, how I didn't see the signs. But Karen tells me that people like Brittany and Edward are professional manipulators, that they built an elaborate lie for years, waiting for the perfect moment to execute their plan when I was most vulnerable after losing my parents. Last week, Madison asked me if her dad was going to come back someday. I told her the truth, that I didn't know, but probably not for a long time. She thought for a moment, and then said, "It's okay. I'm fine here with you and Mommy anyway." She gave me a hug and went back to playing with her dolls. In that moment, I realized that despite everything horrible that happened, the betrayal and the theft and the pain, at least something good came out of all this. I have Karen and Madison in my life now. I have people who really matter to me and who I matter to. Not because of my money, but because of who I am. And Brittany and Edward, well, they have what they deserve. They lost everything because of their greed, and now they're going to spend years paying for it. I guess that's enough for now.